It's Way Up with Angela Yee. I'm Angela Yee on a Wealth Wednesday with my Wealth Wednesday partner, Stacey Tisdale.
Happy Wealth Wednesdays, everybody. And do you get an education today? We're really excited to have Shawn Anthony. He is the CEO, founder of PodProMax. He is a podcasting god.
Yeah, and you know how many people ask me about starting a podcast and what they need to do, what equipment they need, but also, is it lucrative? Because sometimes people feel like things can be oversaturated.
He gave me an education on this. He said, as for is it lucrative, revenue from podcast ads is $23.75 billion, but it's expected to grow to $130 billion by 2030. You got 52 million people listening to podcasts. That number is expected to exceed 100 million by 2024. And the majority of people listen to podcasts between 10 a.m. and 2. And you're going to teach us a whole lot
That's
more
when my show comes on.
That's why I wanted to say that. That's exactly why I wanted to say that.
Glad to be here. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're glad to have you because I've seen you in many different spaces, and you've been on this show and brought people up here many times. So let's talk about what made you even decide to start PodProMax.
Yeah, what made me start PodProMax is that, like, when I think about podcasting, I come from a corporate background. What happened was that I got promoted so much in corporate. I got promoted 6 times in 4 years, and I stumbled across podcasting. Mm-hmm. So I stumbled across this podcasting app after taking a job promotion that took me 6 hours away from my family. And while doing that, I started a show called School's Over, Now What? And it completely blew up. And it allowed me to interview people like Ryan Serhant, Ed Milet, Matthew Knowles, and so many others. But while podcasting, it became a huge side hustle, and everyone asked me to start teaching them that, and that led to PodProMax.
I know you started podcasting in 2018. Yep. And your big break actually came from Ryan Serhant, who Angela knows very well.
Yes. Yeah, I'm part of the Serhant team.
Part of the Serhant team from the real estate group.
But you said you were watching him on $1 Million Listing. He was your favorite.
Yes, he was my favorite $1 Million Listing. And what happened is on episode 7, he wrote a book called Sell It Like Serhant, and I reached out to him and I pitched the idea. I think so many people that are podcasters think you have to have a huge audience in the very beginning, but what it really takes is having a show that people can see themselves being a part of.
Right.
Ryan was a part of that show, episode 7, and it changed everything. He was doing a vlog, and vlogs at the time were bigger than the actual show itself. And I left a comment under the vlog after people kept asking, who is Ryan talking to? And by doing that, I woke up the next morning and the show had 75,000 downloads.
Wow.
Yeah, he pinned a comment.
That's amazing. And some people would not think, and I'm glad you said, because you started in 2018, but this interview happened in 2020.
No, right? This interview happened in 2018.
Oh, that happened in 2018.
On episode 7.
Oh, that was so early.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, but this totally defeats my point. A lot of people ask about starting a podcast, and people can be impatient too. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it does take one thing that can really blow something up, but you have to be prepared for that. To be able to happen. But that did happen fairly quickly for you.
Yeah, it did. And I think where people make the mistake with podcasting is they'll call the podcast their name. In 2018, nobody knew who Shawn Anthony was. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I created a show that I knew when you heard it, you're going to immediately have a feeling. Right. You hear the word school's over, now what? You're like, what am I to do?
And everybody can relate to that.
Absolutely.
Whether it's high school or college or... any type of further education than that or trade school, it's like, now what?
Absolutely. And I think that's what made so many people resonate with it so early off.
You get a 6-figure side hustle.
Yes.
And you turned this into a 6-figure side hustle without any advertisers. You weren't even a company yet. How did that happen?
Yes. So while I was podcasting, everyone kept asking me, how do you do it? Like, how are you setting up the microphone? How are you picking out the software? How are you landing the guests? And that required me to start teaching so many people podcasting. So I started to create my own ads. I had my own ebooks. I gave away my own courses, which gave me more speaking opportunities. And by 2020, it was a 6-figure side hustle.
Sheesh.
So you were the ads.
Yeah, I wore the ads. I wore my own ads.
And I'm glad you say that about equipment, because one thing I always tell people when they're starting a podcast, make sure your audio sounds good. Because it's really hard for people to listen to something and they'll give up. Even if it's good information, people will be like, this just doesn't sound good. And so it is important. One of the main things, and our producer Dan will tell you, he always is checking the levels, making sure the audio sounds right, getting that right. But for you, what would you tell people because they do always ask me this, what equipment do you need? How much money do you think you need to get started? Things like that.
Yeah, the first thing you want to do is you want to have a hosting site. I think so many people think when you have a podcast, you're uploading it on Spreaker, you're uploading it on Spotify, you're uploading it on Apple, but but you want a hosting site where you can have this. And then I would say the next thing is get you a good microphone. You know, I did over 100 episodes with a Blue Yeti microphone, which was only $99 at the time. But I'll say now the best microphone to probably go for would be like a SM7B. A Shure SM7B is a great choice. Rodecaster Pro also makes great microphones as well. And that's really all you need to get started.
That's amazing.
I think there's 3.2 million podcasts out there, but only 700,000 are active.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of it, and that's why I say consistency, because so many people are like, I'm starting a podcast. It's like everybody has one, but only a few will keep going with it.
Absolutely.
Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. You know, there's this thing called pod fade. People get excited about starting a show. They start a show. They run out of topics. They run out of ideas. And a lot of people are falling for that. I think you have to start a show with something that gets you excited. For me, I felt guilty because I was, succeeding in the corporate world when none of my friends were. And that was my goal. That was my mission, to invite people like Ryan Serhant, invite people like Ed Mylett, Seth Godin, and many more to teach and give the game away. And I think if you're starting a show and you don't want to have pod fade, make sure you're passionate enough about that topic.
Guidance, too.
Yes.
And you literally offer people that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we do at PodProMax is that we offer that guidance, that coaching, that ability to understand, okay, how do you start a show? You never want to launch a show with just one episode.
Right.
Think about all the things we like, whether it's Power or whether, it's Ozark. We like to binge watch it. So I always recommend whenever you start a podcast, you want to have at least 3 episodes so that your audience can listen to it, understand who you are, but then in that second episode, talk about what you can expect, and then the third episode, just start delivering it. So if you say you're going to do interviews, that's when you start having that interview and that first guest.
What do you think about people signing? Because a lot of times people want to start a podcast, but they're like, how can I get a deal, or where should I go to get this done?
Yeah.
And I feel like people want that type of backing. It's like signing a record deal versus being independent. So can you talk about how, if you need to do this on your own, because I know some people at first, it's not easy for the average person to just get picked up by an ad company or, to get a special type of deal. And people do think about money. Like, how can I make money from this? So what do you say to people who are just getting started? Maybe they have their 3 episodes. Now what?
Yeah, I think people that are just getting started, you have your 3 episodes. If you think about the topic that you started, if you follow what we said, if you start a show off of passion, something you're excited about, there's a reason behind that. You have something that you can offer. You don't have to wait for those ads. But if you are waiting for that company to come sign you, I think you got to make some noise. If you think about it, right? If you look at some of the people right now who are getting podcast deals, they've made enough noise to get people excited about them. So whether that's bringing in certain guests, whether that's figuring out different ways to kind of make it entertaining, those are the keys. But also be careful when you sign those deals, because a lot of those deals give up IP. In 2020, when my podcast became a 6-figure side hustle, I could have signed a deal and lost 50% of my IP, but I chose not to after listening to some great advice, and I'm so glad I did.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
And that's important. That's why mentorship and talking to people who have already done it and done it successfully and have a track record, that's one of the most important things that you can do, because sometimes we feel like we have to do it on our own, but being able to reach out and get help, and also help from the right people.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Done it.
When I got that contract for 50% of my IP, I took the contract and I sent it to Matthew Knowles. Matthew Knowles was a guest on my show.
Beyonce's dad.
Yeah, he was a guest on my show in 2019, and now he's a client that I represent. And he looked at it, and he brought up some very good, valid points. So you're right about that. You got to have the right mentor that you trust to put the right things in front of, especially before you sign your life away.
But for our audience out there listening, you are the right mentor.
Absolutely.
And they can tell people how you work with
yes.
them.
So you can work with us with PodProMax in 3 different ways. I understood editing was a problem. So we have the ability to edit anybody's show. So if you're listening right now and you're struggling with your show edited, we can take away all that pain from you. The second way that we work with people is we manage them in talent. So we represent several clients in terms of brand deals, negotiating speaking opportunities. And then the third way is the podcast tours. And I'm really excited about the podcast tours, because everybody does not need to have a podcast, right? What we need is a platform and a place to speak on where we can be the authority. And that's why podcast guesting is so amazing. And we've had tremendous results with people like Arlen Hamilton, Dr. Danielle Jervey-Harmon, the Polites, and many more.
Okay, well, you can check out Shawn at podpromax.com/wayup and get a special discount for Way Up. It's very special.
Yeah.
Talk about past podcasting, not just I want to have my own podcast, but podcasting as a tool for entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it, right? There's so many entrepreneurs who want to be on stage speaking, and they can't get on stage, right? So I think it's important to make sure that you have your own platform if that is the case, and opportunities can come from that. But I think you also have to be creative. You can't just have an interview style show. You have to have the ability to have different segments on your show to maybe
Right.
talk about topics that you're an expert at.
You know, it's interesting because I started my lip service podcast like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was before podcasting was like what it is today. So people don't even realize like 10 years is a long time. I never would have anticipated, because when it first started, people were acting like, well, it's hard to monetize. People aren't really trying to spend money. Companies don't necessarily. But now, you know, it's something that people are really making their living off of. People have quit their jobs just to do their podcast. People are going on tour based off of their podcast. So it is definitely something that's viable. But you know, there's a lot of things that have to come together for that cream to rise to the top, because, you know, just as there are some that are going to really stand out, you need to make sure you have the tools and be ready for that to happen, because there's so many, like we said when we first started, that people started, they get excited about it, and then, you know, it just kind of fades out. And also people want to see money real fast.
Yeah.
How long do you think it should take before people, well, I know that's a weird question, but if you had to tell somebody and they're like, how do I monetize this? I want to make some money. This is taking too long. You know, what would you tell somebody that's waiting to get at least some paycheck from this?
Yeah, I mean, we've had the ability to get people funded and get money before their show even launched. And the strategy behind that is looking at that brand in itself, right? I'll give you the perfect example. Someone like Miss Skittles that we've worked with, you know, someone that's built a different story about themselves where they overcome something, they've gotten a large following. People are waiting to hear their voice. The good thing about podcasting is that you and I both can be on a podcast right now, and someone's going to resonate with everything you're saying way more than me, and or vice versa, because of that. Because everyone is waiting for that unique person that truly represents them, and having the ability to take someone's brand overall and sell. That's very possible in doing
What
that.
if you don't have a large following though? Because there's more people that don't have that.
Yeah, I think you got to play with the niches. You got to play in with the niches and whatever your niche is, and being able to talk about that. So, for example, if you're a barber starting a new podcast and you have a product that you're waiting for people to try out, you can talk about that product while interviewing someone while you're doing something on their hair, or perhaps, you know, talking about whatever that topic is and being able to share that. You can put your own products in. I think too many people are waiting for that company. You know, I never waited for that company.
So you help people with that marketing and that brand strategy as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think marketing is beyond just reels. You know, people put out reels all times a day, but I think marketing is understanding who do you need to be sharing those reels with? What communities do you need to be speaking with so that they have that information? I think it's very important as well.
And what about these tours
Yes.
that I've heard so much about?
Yeah, the podcast tours is where it's at. You know, we've had, I'll just name drop some of the shows we placed our clients on. We placed our clients on shows like Earn Your Leisure. We placed our clients on shows like the Founder Podcast with Chris Lee, The Journey with Morgan and Bond. And a lot of these shows are in the top of the charts. And what makes PodProMax so special when we work with talent is that we understand where you are. You know, we have everyone that comes into our company doing intake form. We understand exactly your speaking points. And that's the surprising part about the podcast tour is there are shows that some talent can get to that others can't.
Right.
And I think that's important to talk about and making sure that you're matching them up correctly.
Even leaving corporate America for you, right?
Yeah.
What was that like, and how did you know it was time?
Oh, I love this question. You know, my last job was a place we all shopped at.
Yep.
I was a corporate
Target.
brand manager of Target. before that, it was Belk, and before that, it was Macy's. I think you got to get your ducks in a row. I could have left my job in 2020. What I found out, and I think it's going to be very helpful, I found out that you had to have, in North Carolina where I'm from, you had to have 2 years of tax records before you bought a home. Mm-hmm. And so when I made my business in LLC in 2020, I couldn't leave my job yet, even though the side hustle was making more money, you know, so I was able to, you know, stay there, at the same time have a home built, acquire what I needed off that corporate job. I think if you're listening to this.
Thank God you bought a house then, by the way, when the rates were what they were.
Oh, man, the percentage was outrageous
They
back
were like,
then.
get used to this 6% right now.
Oh,
Straight,
man,
yeah.
that 2% is going to be a forever home, isn't it?
Exactly.
But yeah, I think you have to understand where you are in your journey. How can you utilize that corporate job? But I also think, you know, that job also had a lot of benefits where it puts you ahead of a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when it comes to hiring teams. You know,
Right.
I was at a level where I hired, you know, hundreds of people reporting to me, and now I'm able to assemble my own team based off of what I've learned from that job. So you never can, you know, fold on where you came from, but also look forward.
What about also helping people with their podcast where maybe you might feel like this isn't working? Because sometimes we get stuck and committed to an idea, but pivoting into a different idea or kind of evolving into something else might work better.
Yeah.
You know, are you guys able to help with that and saying, okay, I don't know if this is necessarily your lane. Let's try to work it like this.
Yes, and what you're talking about is someone that starts a show. They say, okay, I'm going to start it. It's going to be exactly like this.
Right.
But figure out, okay, this is not working.
Yeah.
This is not the thing for me. You know, in those cases, what we found out is we identified, like, what were the clips that really got people interested? What were the episodes that really got people to listen? There's a website called listennotes.com that ranks shows by listenership and in a percentage. And there's a high chance if you're a podcaster listening to this, you're doing way better than what you think you are. You just need to go to listennotes.com and it'll tell you the percentage. But we're able to listen to the show, pay attention to certain points where people downloaded certain episodes, and then we're able to switch the entire narrative. And have
that's
them do
great
something
research.
different. Yeah, it's pretty.
To be able to
awesome.
have for, you know, and segments like you said earlier are also a great idea when you have a podcast. So you're not just, because sometimes people come in and think they don't have to prepare.
Correct.
And they'll just come in and just start rambling and talking, no type of, and people do like, sometimes they'll listen in for a certain segment.
Yeah. I think there's a couple shows like that. I think Full Send Podcast is definitely a show like that where people want to feel like they're in the living room with you. But I think there's a lot of shows right now where people tune into them like they tune into anything else.
Right.
And they want them to be prepared and be knowledgeable.
Yeah. All right.
Wow. So people can go to PodProMax.com/wayup.
Yep.
I also wanted to talk to you. I know a lot of people that you do work with, like Matthew Knowles. Shawn works with all the top people, and they've all mentioned that your network
Yes.
is one of the things that you bring to the table for people who work with you. Talk about the importance of that in growing a podcast.
Yeah, your network is your net worth. And I think if you have a podcast, it's the huge cheat code to getting in front of whoever you want to get in front of, right? If I didn't start a podcast, I wouldn't be sitting with neither one of you right now. And I think right now with a podcast and having that is so key. But for me, my network has allowed for me to do tremendous things. You know, you think about, you know, that's over 6 years of moving around in the right rooms with the right people that's able to accelerate someone. So we're able to meet people and share who we know that you should know, whether you want to speak somewhere, whether you want a brand deal somewhere, or perhaps you want your show to be on the top of the charts.
You know what I noticed about podcasting too? The difference between men and women and like who ends up in the top rankings, how much people get paid, you know, how much media actually pays attention to podcasts. I feel like in that space, you know, women kind of tend to get the short end of the stick, just for myself, you know, personally, and people who I know who have been struggling to do this and make it happen. What do you find in your having worked with so many different people when it comes to men and women and any disparities in podcasting?
Yeah, I would say, you know, the women by far that I've worked with have had the ability to attract actually more than the men. And I think there's a lot of statistics right now that are showing just the power of entrepreneurship coming from women. And I think the right people are understanding and seeing that. And I think what's also important, too, is the network play. We talked about networks. Some networks have done a really good job of bringing in women and men who are promoting each other on podcasts. And I think that's where we have the biggest opportunity. So if someone's listening to your show, like if you were on a certain network, instead of an ad talking about a product or an ebook, it would talk about your show and why they should listen to it. I think we need to do a better job promoting women and a better job promoting each other, and that will lead to even better deals.
It's incredible. CNBC found that 67% of listeners remember an ad that they heard on a podcast versus any other medium.
Yes, and I think that's because a lot of those ads are host-read ads.
Yeah.
You know, I think host-read ads have the highest conversion because you're listening to a voice that you already trust, and that's a huge key.
And I think it's more fun. Usually they give you a little bit more leeway on a podcast, you know, it's the difference between radio and podcasting on what you can say and where you can kind of go with it, because you can make it more fun. It's a little more loose. It's a little more conversational than straight reading an ad, from my experience, from what we've had to do.
100%, I would agree with that.
So if I'm listening to this, I want to start a podcast, or I'm an entrepreneur who wants to build my brand starting a podcast. don't want to do it from scratch and I want to work with you, what do I get and what do you do?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the first thing you want to get is you want to get the free podcast starter kit. You can get that on my Instagram at Shawn or Anthony _ But the next thing you want to do, if you're someone that says, okay, I'm listening to this, I want to be in these rooms, I want to be on some of these shows, I want to also have the ability to speak my message, you want to join PodProMax. And you want to make sure you go to podpromax.com/wayup. We're doing a special offer. Only doing this for you guys. But if you go to podpromax.com/wayup, we'll start a 5-show tour, which will allow for you to experience some of these things that some of our amazing clients have as well and work with us.
So you help from setup to editing to the tour.
Yes, we have 3 different opportunities to work with us. We can edit your show if you're a podcaster with the show, but everyone doesn't need to have a podcast. And everyone may not have a podcast listening to this, but everybody needs to be speaking on podcasts so that they can talk about who they are and what they have going on and spread that brand message and authority. So that's where we really shine at and placing people on podcast tours and allowing them to be seen.
Yeah, last thing. So you had your... Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You, as we said at the beginning of this, you had your aha moment when Ryan Serhant came on your show. And if I'm listening to this, I'm like, how the heck do I get a guest like Ryan Serhant to come on my show? I know you and I have spoken about this before. It's a science.
Yeah. The science is this, you can't shoot for the stars without the stars understanding that you're going to be there near them. And I say the way that you do that is you network around the room. So if you're listening right now, and if you want Angela Yee on your podcast, here's a strategy I would try. I would pay attention to who's her producer. She's already mentioned Dan, right? Have Dan on your show. Talk to Dan on your show. And what'll happen is as you're pitching Angela, if you mention you had Dan as a guest, there's a high chance she'll pay a little bit more attention. I learned that with Ed Mylett. Ed Mylett is one of the biggest podcasters on the planet. Episode 42, he invited me to his home in Laguna Beach in California. And by the time I got there, I had interviewed like 20 of his best friends. It was a no-brainer. So I think we have to start networking around to go up.
Dan is way harder to get than Angela. He's like an untouchable.
Dan, like, who, what, me?
Right strategy, right
Dan is
strategy.
the man.
But honestly, the editing that he does for this show and for Lip Service is really critical. So that's why I think having an editor, because that's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's crazy.
It's a lot.
And sometimes you weigh yourself down with the logistics of getting something done where you can be the talent if you have a podcast and not have to deal with okay, now I have to get this edited. Now I have to, it's nice to have this service that's available for people.
That's what you were saying at the beginning. So many people just can't sustain it.
They pod fade. And that's exactly why.
Yeah, it's a big commitment, and especially if that's not your main thing, it can be. I think the amount of time that you don't have to spend on editing and making sure this sounds and making sure that's right and doing. If somebody else can handle that for you and make it sound flawless and edit out the things that don't need to be in there and make sure it sounds good, like with volumes and everything, and make sure people aren't like all of that is so helpful.
Absolutely. It allows for you to stay longer and listen to it. Right? We've all, came across clips on Instagram that we scroll right past when we start hearing that little white noise. So it's so key that you have that
You might
done.
change after that. Like, I can't even do this.
You missed the whole message.
Yeah. Now, listen, you said you almost, well, not almost, but you went to Matthew Knowles. You sent him your deal.
Yep.
Now, can you hang somebody outside a window upside down if they signed a bad deal and they're trying to get out of it? Or what? Can you guys participate?
Everything, lawyers got to get involved or something like
I
that.
got to process that visual.
And there might be some people who've done that before in the past, but not us.
Big Red over here.
Yeah, some people have done that before in the past, but not us. I think it's important to make sure you cross T's and dot I's on all that paperwork.
Right, like let's say somebody does have a deal. Like, would you guys have the ability to be like, let me take a look if, or... How does that work?
I mean, we would take a look at it, and for sure, I think the best deal you can sign, it'd be amazing if you sign a deal that's a non-exclusive deal.
Okay.
If you're in that situation, a non-exclusive deal will allow a lot more wiggle room. There are probably some termination and clauses, depending on what the termination is. In some cases, if you have any deals within the next 3 or 6 months, there might have to be a couple payouts, but there's always a way.
I had an opportunity to do a deal for Lip Service, but it would have been behind a paywall, and it would have been exclusive, and I didn't do it. Even though it could have been a nice, money coming in, I also felt like it would shrink our audience so much. And then it was an exclusive deal, so we couldn't put it on all the platforms. And so for that reason, I felt like it was not a great situation to be in.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's make it a right situation. We got some things we're working on at PodProMax.
Yeah, well, we got
Wow.
it.
Well, so Shawn's got you soup to nuts. He's got your legal, he's got your marketing, he's got your branding, he's got your tech setup,
Your
and
muscle.
he's giving
Yeah, we got security if you need
your
it.
hustle. I know your muscle. And we are just honored. When you go to podpromax.com/way-up, you get a 10% discount.
Yep, absolutely.
Just for the listeners of this show.
Yep.
So we
You know,
really
he doesn't do
appreciate
that too often, so snatch
He
that
never
up.
does that.
I've never
I know
done it.
this man. He
I've
never
never done
does
it.
that. But we do appreciate that.
I appreciate you both.
All right, thank you so much.
Way up.